Happy Friday, guys. As we're recording this, it's Friday. Welcome back to Promoters Corner. We've got Steve and Eric from Warrior. How are you guys doing on this kind of rainy, balmy Friday in Chicago?
I'm
I'm
good.
also rainy and balmy.
You're adjusting to the weather, right?
Yeah, I'm like a chameleon, man. I'm just covered in water and I don't know. I don't know where this bit is going. I'm doing
I'm
well.
in I'm in my basement, so I don't even know what the weather's like outside. I'll find out this afternoon.
Well, we've got a fun one on deck today. We're kind of taking a quick break from the first two we talked about. Were all about title reigns, with Will Ospreay becoming Warrior champion, and then with Vikingo retaining the Lucha Championship in the last edition. This one, we're going to talk the Stadium Series, which in itself could be an entire podcast, just explaining how that came to fruition. But let's rewind. This show takes place late September in 2020. We all know what was going on in September and just in all of 2020. And so let's talk about how Warrior started 2020. He started with a really great show in the gym, headlined by a War of Attrition match. And I think we all had a lot of plans for 2020, pro wrestling aside, that just went upside down. So prior to the pandemic happening, were there any big follow-up plans coming out of that show that occurred in early February for Warrior?
Oof. I remember having some conversations with Will because we had just had Will in December of 19. And I remember talking about some dates with Will. Will really wanted him and Robbie Eagles to work the velocities. We were trying to put that together at some point. um, Having some initial conversations with Pillman about what his title reign would look like and what kind of matches and things like that. Um, and then the world just fell apart, right? Like, I mean, that from there it was everything just got thrown into the blender.
Yeah, it's a good way
Yeah,
to put it.
at that time we were running less regularly too. So I think that was by 20 we started in May 11th of 18, I believe. By February of 20, that was only show 8,
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so.
right? So the frequency of Warrior shows was far less. So um, I, I promise you, as much thought and planning as people might think we put into some of this stuff, sometimes it was just like, let's get through this show and we'll circle the wagons afterwards and figure out what we want next. And I feel like that show purposely left a lot of things open as opportunities. Um, but we didn't. I don't even think we had the next show date chosen yet by that point, which ended up being a blessing in disguise because we hadn't committed anything monetarily to the spring of 20, which is something that allowed us to keep running after the spring of 2020. We didn't, we weren't suffering. I know there were a lot of companies out there who were suffering big time because of all the money that they had already put out or the deposits on things and trying to what was it, the collective. I mean, all
I
that
was just
stuff
gonna
that was
say
going. There
it.
was so much bad luck for indie wrestling in general that happened from that and the domino effect. So we didn't have anything. We had nothing on the books after show 8, and then when the world fell apart, we just kind of said, let's just see what happens.
Yeah.
That's a
To Eric's point, so two quick things to add. That was the year. So in 19, and then we won't say who or reveal any private conversations, but in late 19, people were pitching us hard to try to do something where I forget Tampa, WrestleMania is supposed to be in Tampa in 20, with all the indie stuff that was going on. And Eric and I just chewed on it for a long time. We're like, we don't think it's a smart investment. We think that's kind of waning, et cetera. And by pure luck, right? Nobody knew the pandemic was coming. Thank God we didn't, because there were some people who really wanted us to make a big investment into Tampa 2020, and folks did that and lost a lot and had a lot of fights and legal battles and that kind of thing. So we were just very lucky. Obviously, we didn't have the foresight that a global pandemic was coming, but we were lucky there. And also, I think Warrior 8 was also we had to change gears in a lot of ways. A couple people got hurt, some stuff got canceled, so we ended up with two War of Attrition matches, men's and women's. Pillman had fought earlier against Bully Ray, and then he found a way to get him inserted into I forget how he got inserted into the War of Attrition match. So 8 itself was kind of like a shuffle for us. Like it didn't fall on a trajectory of what something we had planned. It was kind of, hey, we've got some really good stuff, and then we had to change a bunch of it. So Warrior kind of was hanging on a to be continued.
Cage was champ, and he was hurt, and that's how Pillman got in. Pillman had a great match against Bully
Ray,
and earlier in the evening, and for whatever I think it was shoulder, something was going on with Cage. He couldn't wrestle that night and couldn't defend his title, and so he still put it up, but he got to choose who replaced him in the War of Attrition. And he ended up choosing Pillman, and Pillman ended up making it all the way to the end.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you bring up because if I recall correctly, even I think Alex Zane was supposed to be in that War of Attrition, and then he had, I believe, a foot or an ankle injury, and he had to bow out of the show. So there was a lot of moving pieces to that Warrior 8 show that, as you mentioned, no one knew was going to be the last traditional show for a long time.
Well, and honestly, I think this will tie into to at least Friday Night Lights, which will then tie into the Stadium Series. Our original vision for that War of Attrition, I think we wanted, if Cage hadn't gotten hurt, I think because he got hurt at Impact, his last Impact date, the pay-per-view, he screwed up his shoulder. We wanted Cage and Archer for February of 2020. But Archer had just signed with AEW. I don't think he was on TV yet. And so the creative got complicated, I will say. And so then we're like, all right, well, we're going to build a War of Attrition where we wanted to get to Cage and Archer. And then Cage got hurt and a whole bunch of stuff happened. So all of that was, we wanted the moment in the ring of Cage and Archer facing off because they were both white hot and they were both awesome. Eric?
I love Frank the Clown, but I think Frank the Clown was in that match as well.
He sure was.
That shows you how many cards got changed throughout the course of that show, and how if you look at what we had on paper 3 weeks before the show compared to the match in the ring, there's crisscross lines marked off and lines over here with question marks and zigzags. And because I remember my biggest memory from especially the opening when it's the craziness and you've got all 8 guys is, if I remember correctly, the very first anything of that match was Archer just destroying Frank. And their history actually dates back, pro segue, to Stadium Series between Archer and the Clown, which we'll talk about on another show, I'm sure.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I will give Frank his props here. So Frank took one move in that War of Attrition. I remember this. He was dead. He crawled out of the ring and then slowly over the course of the entire match crawled back to the ramp and crawled through the curtain and sold it all the way to the locker room, which was another 50 yards past the curtain.
He crawled for about 40 minutes.
Yes, it was. Never doubt Frank the Clown's commitment to the art.
And Eric, as you said, that's a pro segue, and we've kind of mentioned it already. So things go upside down in 2020 for the entire world. And so now comes summertime, this show called Friday Night Lights is invented and ran, and it's run on the football field of Marian Catholic. Ring stuck at the 50-yard line, field seating, first come, first serve, socially distanced. How in the world did you guys think of this in the midst of just absolute chaos in the world?
Well, there is no you guys. There is Eric. Eric had this idea a year before, and it was nebulous. And I'll let you recap the idea, but Eric kind of built the idea. And then when the pandemic hit and everybody's thinking, gosh, what do we do? How do we do things? Illinois came out with guidelines for events for the summer of 2020. And I think we texted each other like within minutes of them coming out because we both read them and we both had the same thought, which was Eric's idea from last year. And that's what we went with. So Eric can tell you the story of the idea, but there is no you guys. This was Eric's.
I often have really good ideas with really bad timing. I will have a really good idea for the summer of 2020, but I will pitch the idea in the winter of 19. But it was supposed to be like a barbecue idea. I was like, I wanted to kind of recreate a festival atmosphere for wrestling, kind of like I was thinking back to old, like the Warp Tours, things like that. I was like, why can't wrestling have its own festival? And so it really started there with this festival idea. And I was like, we do the football field, we've got the parking lots, because Marion has a sprawling outdoor campus, of which that Warrior had never really used before, other than the parking lot. And so, I mean, there's baseball fields, softball fields, practice football fields, the actual football field. We could put on WrestlePalooza, and it would be amazing. And so that was kind of where the idea started. And we talked about it, and it just wasn't the time. Again, timing wasn't right. And then I was sitting in my backyard, and I get a text from Steve, and he goes, there's some new guidelines for shows, because we were joking earlier, in that like a week or so earlier we were talking, and I was like, we should really run a wrestling show because everyone is available. Like, if we could figure out a way to run a show, every single phone number we have, they will pick up. It's not like we joked with Will. We sent emails back and forth for 18 months trying to get them. Everyone is available. Nobody, the dates are wide open. So we're like, if we can figure this out, there is the opportunity to do something really special. And Steve sent me the guidelines. We were looking through it, and we both kind of looked at each other at the same time. We were on the phone, but kind of looked at each other and said, like, I think we can do this. We have an idea. Let's shave off all the extra. We don't need this. We don't need that. We don't need a multiple stages or anything. But let's get to the core of the idea: outdoor wrestling, field house wrestling, outside. And that's where it came from. And we started making some phone calls. I'm sure Steve had to convince a handful of people, including God, because the weather that day was the most beautiful summer day. And I don't know how he got the school to commit or anybody else, but we started sending out some kind of feelers and texts and calls, and everyone, like I said, everyone that we reached out to was like, oh my God, I need this so bad right now. Like, I need to be around wrestling. I need to see my wrestling friends. I need to experience the thrill of the match. I need to just chant stupid things. Like, looking back on it, I don't think we remember just how desperate we were. I think I personally, I'm sure I've, blocked out some of the lowest of the lows. But it was one of those things where if a little bit of luck can meet a little bit of opportunity with just a little bit of preparation, we could have a trifecta of just like an amazing day. And that's what it ended up being.
Yes. Ditto to all of that.
So that's Friday Night Lights. Obviously, it went off, like Eric said, even the weather was perfect that day. It went off so well that you decided to create the Stadium Series, which has been brought back in different iterations. But this original one was 3 consecutive Saturdays in September of 2020. So was that just a meeting between you two of going, hey, that was really cool. Let's do it again 3 more times? Like, how did that specifically play out?
Yes. And we also knew we were up against a ticking clock as far as weather.
Right.
Because we, at that point, by deep into the summer of 20, so Friday Night Lights was August of 20. We were all, at that point, we're like, oh, shoot, like live events and people gathering in large spaces is not coming back. We think in school years for the coming school year. Like,
Right.
we knew the 2021 school year, there aren't going to be assemblies and pep rallies and games and all of these things. Like, it's just, it's kaput. So we looked at the closing window of weather and we went, we have until the end of September to run any more shows like this we want to run. And then we're going to be off till next summer. And we were. It was the longest dark period that we've ever gone not running wrestling or anybody at that point, right? So it was October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, all with no wrestling. So we looked at that closing weather window and we said, let's do a bunch. Let's do one a week in September. Like, let's just, for ourselves, for our fans, for the talent, for everybody, let's get a bunch in before we hibernate and close up shop for 10 months.
Right on. And yeah, in those 3 weeks in September, there was just and Eric kind of mentioned this earlier. I don't think we realized how bad we needed to sit on a football field socially distance from our friends and just yell goofy things at a ring as people are wrestling. So, four successful shows that summer. Let's talk about the combatants in the match. You've already mentioned Frank the Clown, who is going with Robert Anthony against Joey Janela in a no holds barred falls count anywhere match. So, looking at their history, Robert Anthony and Steve and I talked about this a little bit in the last iteration of who were some of the early pillars of Warrior. And Robert Anthony has been it was a part of so many of those early shows. And I've got the list in front of me. He was a part of a tag team match at Warrior 2, a scramble at Warrior 3. He went back and forth with Pillman Jr. at Warrior 4 and 5, against Jake Atlas at 7, and then against Warhorse at 8 before we get to Friday Night Lights. How, and I mean, I know Robert Anthony has had this a very long career and he's been a staple of Chicago wrestling. How did you first get in contact with him for those early wrestling shows? How did he get in a Warrior ring?
This is an Eric story.
There's a theme to this episode.
So, without peeling back too many layers, I know Ego personally before I met Ego.
Okay.
And so it was one of those things. Actually, we were at a social event. I think we we're at a baseball game actually, and he and I were talking, and the topic of wrestling just kind of came up. And it was one of those moments where he didn't know that I was associated with Warrior, and I didn't know that he was egotistico fantastico. And it was one of those things, like, as the conversation kept going, it was kind of like wait, because you're, and I'm, and we, and it was just kind of became one of those like, whoa, kind of small world moments where I knew Rob, and Steve had the wrestling with Warrior, and Rob and Frank are very close. And I think Frank was if I remember correctly, at one, Frank was a referee.
Yep.
And so we had already had the relationship with Frank. And it was just one of those kind of things when you have so many data points connecting certain people or things or ideas, it just becomes one of those like, well, why the hell aren't we doing this? And so from there, it just kind of became an obvious answer. Like, this guy's incredible. He's very talented. He knows the business. He knows he has done so many different angles. And I don't mean like storyline angles. I mean professional wrestling from so many different angles, from wrestler to booker, promoter to calling matches, to championships, to so many different styles, so many different match types, and his own network within all of that experience. It was, it was one of those easy calls, especially for Steve and I, who were still very, very green to the indie wrestling scene, and kind of still figuring out, how do things work? Are we supposed to do it like that or like this? And so as we were kind of putting those pieces together, and then Rob falls into place, it became just a great kind of combination for the two of us to be able to have a talent like him in our locker room from a very early date.
All right, so we've talked a little bit about Frank the Clown. He's been a really consistent part. Like, we've talked about his relationship and managing or seconding, however you want to classify it, with Ego. He's also been, as Warrior evolved, he got his own faction. He had FTC LLC. And I think he's got a pretty good lawyer in that faction, because I do recall a couple of times he tried to get him removed, and his lawyer got him back in. So whoever his lawyer is pretty good. Um, and so, how did him becoming a constant manager, like, did you see any evolution from when he was strictly working with Ego to developing the FTC stable? Did you see any kind of evolution with him as a manager or as a leader of the stable?
Yeah, I think we just followed the reaction of the crowd, right? Like, he got great heat. He's a very unlikable human being, and he's very good at doing dastardly things in and around wrestling matches. And it made sense. And people love to hate him. They want to see him get beat up. And so how do we build around that and continue to make him more and more of a focal piece? So again, I hate doing this, but give credit to Frank for being an excellent performer and being really great at pro wrestling. I still want to punch him in the face.
And it worked really well. Like I said, we were running so intermittently.
Mhm.
We weren't running every week or even every month. And Frank has an uncanny ability. He doesn't need a long time for someone to hate him. He doesn't need a big story. You don't have to be here last week to hate Frank this week. And so for our kind of model of when we were running almost quarterly, he had a very unique skill that not a lot of people have been able to just walk in cold with a crowd of 500 people. And within 30 seconds, he had them all waiting for him to get punched in the face. And so that played itself to us a lot as well. And we kept putting him in the spotlight and he kept knocking it out of the park. So it worked well for everybody, I think.
All right, so let's talk to the third person in this match, Joey Janela, the bad boy. You first get him at the first night of the Stadium Series. He wrestles Warhorse for a number one contendership match. There's a spot in there where they literally run um, from the ring at the 50-yard line to the end zone just to get slammed in the end zone for like a touchdown. So how did, in one of the craziest times in pro wrestling in human history, how did Joey Janela end up in a Warrior ring during this specific time?
Yeah, I think we've always liked Joey's work, right? And he's always got a great buzz around him. He's a phenomenal wrestler. In all, people know him getting famous for all the crazy stunts, but he's a phenomenal professional wrestler all around. And it was just a question of bringing in a great attraction for us at this time and figuring out something to do to make people buy into what he's going to do next. And credit to everybody involved. We told a 3-show because we were going to be in the same place for 3 weeks in a row. We told a 3-show storyline. Joey Janela beats Warhorse. He's attacked by mystery people. The mystery people reveal themselves the next week to be Robert Ego Anthony and Frank the Clown, and they murder a couple young wrestlers and challenge Joey Janela. And then we get in the third week the no holds barred match in the Stadium Series. Falls count anywhere, no holds barred, etc. And so it was the perfect combination of characters, workers, the fans hating one act, Ego and Frank, and loving Janela, and then also having that incredible creativity and playground, as Eric alluded to earlier, of the stadium. Man, like there's a lot of toys they can play with in a stadium, and they sure did.
We're going to see a lot of that in a minute. And so I'm going to cue up the video here in a second. Just a quick rundown. And Steve, you alluded to this here a minute ago of how we got here was Joey has that match with Warhorse. He gets jumped by a couple of masked assailants. The next week, they reveal it was Frank and Robert Anthony that did that to Joey. They absolutely destroy a couple of young wrestlers, and we get to the match we are going to watch now. So let me get this queued up. All right. Let me just get my volume up here. All right, so let's jump into it. We're at the 12-minute, 45-second mark. This was one of the YouTube videos that is on the Warrior channel. So we can see the kind of promotional graphic here. What I love about the start of this match, and this has become a running theme, I feel like, with Frank, is he always has a interesting vehicle to enter in. He's got this motorized tricycle here. We've seen him enter in a limo and a helicopter. He knows how to make an entrance, I guess you could say, right?
Yeah, well, and I think that's a combination of all of those things you just mentioned are a little bit Eric and I being creative about the space, and a lot Frank too. So like for Friday Night Lights, which was the previous show, he and Ego entered in a gator with a fake wrestling ring built on the back of it, just like WrestleMania 3, Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant entered in. And they drove around. And this one, they're like, well, how do we up from the gator? They rented this, I don't know if it's a spider or a skate or what type of crazy mobile this is, but they drove around the track, slingshot maybe. They drove around the track and just were a presence. And that is, all pro wrestling has a little bit of show to it. And Frank and Ego are excellent at the showpiece.
It's got a
It makes what
million.
you're about to see feel bigger, right? Like it feels, then if they just walked out, it feels big. And like you just said, confetti, he's got a giant mallet. I mean, like, again, it feels like a spectacle.
And I feel like that goes with the scenery. Like, it's kind of a spectacle to have an independent wrestling match in the middle of a high school football field. So up the ante a little bit, have them enter on this motorized tricycle, have him enter on a helicopter. And now Robert Ego Anthony has to and Frank has to go through the curtain to come back through the curtain to get their proper introduction from Kirby. What did you just say, Eric, about it sometimes just takes 30 seconds for you to want to punch Frank in the face. And it's the little things like that, I feel like, that adds to his character.
Yeah, he's very so Frank the clown is one thing. Frank the person obviously he's very meticulous. He thinks about these things. He plans these things. He by the time he comes out with the clown makeup on, he has already done 100 mental reps. I mean, he has pictured it. He has thought about it. He has played out different things. He and I we'll talk on the phone and kind of walk through things like for as much as it looks like he just kind of shows up and creates havoc, he is very calculated and he is very intentional about those things. And every little thing that he does has been thought about, has been practiced, has been so that when he gets to that moment, he has, like I said, that ability. One lap in a car around a football field, and everybody in that stadium hated him. He didn't say anything. He barely did anything. You just have to look at him and, like you said, watch those little things, those little interactions that he does. And you're just like, I can't wait for that guy to get what's coming, which is honestly, it's wrestling at its finest.
And here comes the guy that's gonna give him what he has coming. Joey comes through the curtain, and Joey. I feel like Joey. I associate fun with him with pro wrestling. He makes it fun. He's coming out here, no fun, no games. This is business. He's ready to kick some ass.
Yeah, and as I alluded to earlier, right, like there, and gosh, look at the whole get up. Like he just looks like such
Right.
a character, such a clear cut character. But Joey's a phenomenal professional wrestler. Some people think he's a stuntman. Some people think he's this or that or the other thing. He can be what the match demands. He can be what the situation demands. And this is a fight, and he's coming out to fight.
And he doesn't even wait for the bell to ring to start loading the ring up with some doors that will definitely be used very soon. We even saw Frank and Ego come out with a kendo stick. I feel like, this is still relatively early Warrior. This is one of the more like hardcore matches, if you want to call it that had been put on in a Warrior ring up to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And the story demanded it.
And this is also, another one of those situations where you've got Joey is kind of known for like the backyard wrestling type stuff. But this is also where Robert Anthony, his just trove of experience. I mean, he has experience in these kind of matches well beyond what I think Warrior fans may have known. I mean, you go back to his CZW days and you see some of the stuff that Robert Anthony was doing in a ring, and you look at this and it kind of makes sense. It's just one of those perfect storm moments. You've got the perfect two guys in the ring, the perfect story, the perfect match style, the perfect environment for this match to take place in. Their experience shows. These are not two guys who are new to this environment or to this main event style match with this kind of stipulation involved. These guys showed up ready to play, and they put on one hell of a match.
And it's a fast start. As the bell is ringing, they're trading blows. Now we're already seeing the weapons get involved. And like Eric said, this is not a new environment for these guys.
No, it's not a new environment with the hardcore element. As Eric said, I completely forgot the element of CZW versus GCW. You've got that. But also, too, it's not a new environment being in a main event and being, this wasn't the main event of the show. This show had a triple main event, and they were the first one to go on. But in a main event caliber match, a match that has built, for weeks and weeks and weeks, these guys know what they're doing, and they're damn good at it.
And we even see one thing that's interesting if you're watching along with the video with this podcast, the commentators are very split. Rich is very much for Janela, Nick is very much with the Chicago local, the Chicago crowd of Robert and Frank.
Yep.
I don't even remember where we got those doors.
We didn't. I think the ring crew brought them or something. We have
Yeah.
never procured doors, and so that's I know there's wrestling promoters out there who have their tips and tricks for where to get doors instead of tables, etc. We couldn't tell you. I think the ring crew brought them.
Rich, during this match, Rich, and side note, and we'll talk about this more because it kind of comes into play. The wind was crazy during this match. We see the ring apron get blown almost up to the bottom rope. But
Yeah, absolutely. That's part of the risk you take or the dice you roll when you work with the elements. We had one of these stadium series where we had a rain delay.
mhm.
This night was so windy. We actually took down the curtain once the main event was in the ring. We started taking the whole curtain and the pipe and drape down because it was just so windy.
I do remember that first stadium series. The rain came out of nowhere, and it was. I mean, literally, we had to like squeegee down the canvas to try to change it. And this is a total side note, but and we may have talked about this in an earlier version of this, but Alex Shelley and TJP, if I recall correctly, were about to go on when the rain just started coming down, and they had to just completely 180 everything as they're walking to the ring.
Yeah, it was a completely different environment than what it was supposed to be, and so um, there were some changes that had to be made from a safety standpoint. Luckily the wind doesn't affect safety the way that the water does, and so these guys, the wind just kind of adds to the atmosphere of
Mhm.
like the chaos, the storm. Like if we were making a movie or something and this match would happen in the middle of a hurricane, I'm sure. We can't control those elements when you're running a live show, though, and it just kind of worked out nicely that way. That while the conditions weren't ideal, it didn't prevent them from doing any of the incredible action that we see.
And one, I feel we've talked about this unique environment a lot. You know, and even in the last match we watched, there was a dive into the second row, but with this giant arena, as you guys mentioned earlier, there's so much opportunity for the crowd to get involved and be up close and personal without necessarily being in the first row.
Yeah, and two, remember, given the restrictions, so the crowd's a little bit spread out. So
Right.
another thing a match like this does is it brings the match around to everybody. So here we have an amount of people that would normally condense into a high school gym are spread all across a football stadium, and this match brings the action near you. So if you bought your ticket and you sat 25 yards away from the ring, at least for this match, you got a front row seat. And that's again part of what goes into building a show and hopefully satisfying the fans.
We're going to see some awesome athleticism here from Rob taking a lap around the ring. Uses Frank as almost like a track hurdle to end up kicking Joey Janela in the face.
Yeah.
And that speaks to, again, just Rob's experience and ability to recognize this is happening on the other side of the ring. There's an entire half of the football field that is not going to have a great view of this. So I can either alienate them and just do everything here, or what the hell, I'll do a lap around the ring. I'll play it up. I'll make sure everybody sees the build up before I go and build up all my momentum to just dive right into Joey. It was great, using the crowd, getting, like Steve said, closer to the action because we were so spread out. And there were a couple matches in every single one of these shows where we intentionally said, how can we bring this action a little bit closer to everyone? And this one was one of the best examples of it.
And at this point, it almost feels like a 2-on-1 handicap. Frank's helping set up door bridges. He's maybe not throwing something at Joey, but he's being like a support act.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of how the build was too, because it was two guys that attacked Joey Janela. Those two guys were revealed as Frank and Rob the week before. And so it really, it was the underdog babyface going against truly in a handicap match against a premier athlete and his, slimy little henchman. And that's why, spoiler alert for anyone who's on the edge of their seat as they watch this, Joey will get his comeuppance on both of them because you're building to a couple of moments. The moment where he gets Frank, the moment where he gets Rob, and then of course the moment where he gets Frank and Rob, which those of you who have seen this match before, you know what that moment's going to be.
And here's kind of a callback to that part 2 of 3, where these are some of the young wrestlers that got assaulted when it was revealed that it was Frank and Rob that assaulted Joey. They're trying to come out, trying to kind of save the day, and they end up on the wrong side of it again.
Yep. So again, it just, from a wrestling standpoint, it adds heat, right? Here are the big bully and his slimy henchman, and they beat up Martine from Unicorns, right? They beat up some of these other wrestlers. So they're beating up, rookies and people who are defenseless or people who are just doing their job. It makes you, the fan, hate them even more. Hopefully. If you're cheering for them, then we have to have a conversation about your life, fan.
Well, and I think that speaks to the one element of this match that I think we've all alluded to, but maybe never named: storytelling. The storytelling in this match was from previous shows, but even if you didn't see any of those other shows, even if this is your only experience with the Stadium Series, the tone of the match was set instantly. The hot start let you know, oh, we're in for something right now, even if you don't know the background. If you do, obviously it adds to it, but even without it, the storytelling from curtain to curtain on this match was just through the roof. And I think that is just as important to good wrestling. You got to tell that story. And that whole exchange there with Rob just taking it out on the innocent workers of Warrior just tells that story of who he is and what's going on. And they do such a great job over the course of the match of getting it bigger, making it larger, making it more and more obscene what's happening. And so that again speaks to their experience, speaks to their preparation, speaks to just their hatred for each other.
As one of those frequent innocent workers of Warrior Wrestling, I'm glad this didn't go near the merch table.
Yeah. To Eric's point, anywhere that Robert Ego Anthony has been, whether it's freelance or AAW with us and other places, he is able to bring that same level of continuity and making and building the drama around the matches. So he does a really good job. Oh,
that chair, I mean, right to the back of the head. That could not have felt good.
Well, luckily, Joey's bones are made of Play-Doh.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I have no idea how he survives this match.
Yeah, and at several junctures.
And this is kind of an aside, but if I remember correctly, when he wrestled that match with Warhorse 2 weeks before this match, the day or 2 days before, he had just had multiple root canals done. He's so tough. I would be out of commission for 2 months if I had that happen to me.
Yeah. I mean, it's just Joey, right? Like, have a drink, keep on fighting. Like, that's just, it's kind of like that Jon Moxley mentality. These are tough dudes.
There's so many doors. And like you said, you think the ring crew brought him. Rich, a couple of times on commentary, alludes to a used door shop in Florida that may or may not be the ultimate supply chain of doors that end up underneath wrestling rings.
That's another cool element to talk about too, is that Rich and Nick had a lot of fun on these shows. And so the Friday Night Lights was Nick and Val Capone, because travel was so limited.
Mhm.
The only two people who got on a plane for the first Friday Night Lights were Brian Cage and Lance Archer. Everybody else drove. Even Sam Adonis drove in from Pittsburgh, and travel was so limited. It was opening up a little bit here in September of 20, so Rich was able to come by and do commentary. But given the open nature and the different vibe of these shows, they were able to have a lot of fun with calling the matches, and as you mentioned earlier, the banter between them, pro or against, Frank and Joey, etc. They just had fun commentary. I think they were probably in the trailer for this one because they got rained on the week before, so we moved
Mhm.
commentary into a trailer that they called out of a door. Oh, speaking of doors, there goes Joey through a door.
I think you're right that that's an audible that's been called on a couple. Even the last outdoor show in June of 23, uh, wound up the ring ended up getting tarped, and we moved production completely into the ring truck. And by the time bell time happened, the rain was far gone. But that was it, being outside. It's and I think Eric mentioned this earlier. You can't control the weather. You just kind of have to adjust as you go. Feels appropriate. We're
And
talking about this on a day that is very rainy and balmy in Chicago as we record this.
from a promotion standpoint, that was part of the fun of these shows as well. Is literally you don't know until you show up at the venue what you're in for. You can plan for a big beautiful day. The Friday Night Lights was a big beautiful day. We had hoped for another big beautiful day, and we got rained out on one of the shows. And so from a production standpoint, I really enjoy that element of kind of thinking on your feet. You got to be ready for whatever comes next. Steve and I have a little bit of experience in that. Prior to wrestling, he and I worked at a outdoor concert venue in Tinley. It was the Tweeter Center at the time. Now it's some Banks amphitheater or something. But we worked there, and then those concerts ran rain or shine. And sometimes it was shining, and sometimes it was raining, and we had to kind of learn how to continue to produce this live experience and event in all kinds of crazy conditions. So it was definitely a part of the reason why we were able to pull this off was that experience when we were younger, and that kind of prepared us for these moments where it's like, all right, we got to call an audible. Well, it's not the first audible we've all ever called. It's not the last one we've ever called, and there'll be a lot more. So having that experience from our standpoint to be able to say, yeah, we'll run a show outdoors, and who cares if it rains? We'll figure it out. Who cares if
And
it's
Frank
windy?
the Clown's about
We'll
to
figure it
die.
out.
Ugh.
Oh, there's Frank.
Yeah,
As
it
you
did a
mentioned earlier, Steve, there's Frank getting comeuppance on.
yes. The Muppets has been achieved. Yeah, but to Eric's point, that's one of the fun parts of production is if this is going to sound terrible, and I'm sure at some point I'll curse myself for saying this in a future production, but if everything goes exactly as you laid it out, it can be kind of a boring day at the office. Like there is something interesting and fun about navigating the chaos. Like you never want somebody to be injured or travel problems or something to make a show change so you can't deliver the car that you promised people. Um, but sometimes you're put in a position where you're like, all right, well, now we have to figure out how do we make it even better in a 2 hour notice. And there can be an energy and an excitement to that sometimes too.
It's one of those. It's pure chaos when you're in it, but after the fact, you're like, okay, we handled it. Was good. Everything ended up fine.
Well, and sometimes, well, what's that quote that chance favors the prepared mind, right? I mean,
Hmm.
we've gone through all these things. We have all these plans. We talk through audibles beforehand, like, okay, if this happens, what could we do here? If that happens, what could we do there? Could this move here and that flip around? Like when Steve and I probably spend 40 hours on the phone or in person before every single show, just talking through things, figuring things out, planning things. For Warrior, it's such a large scale production that if you don't have those conversations when these things happen, it can be an excitement. It can be an energy or it can be paralyzing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because of the attention and time we've taken to kind of talk through these things, when they happen, it may not be the exact scenario that we kind of talked through, but there's enough similar elements where it's like, okay, well, what if we had this idea? What if we kind of flip this around and do that? And that's where that energy becomes excitement rather than, paralyzing fear.
So Frank is literally being carried over to this three-wheeler here. And we're gonna kind of start to see them making their way over to the end zone. And if you've watched this match, if you know what happens, you know what this is building towards. If you haven't, buckle up. And he literally, if I recall correctly from rewatching this, he drives all three of them over to the end zone. So this vehicle not just gets used for a flashy entrance, it becomes a key part of the matchup.
Yeah, I mean the match was so well put together, and again, not to pull the curtain back too much, the creativity involved was brilliant, and kudos to everybody involved for thinking through what. There's Eric shooing away the crowd as the vehicle is starting to move. Um, yeah, I mean, like if you watch a truly epic, well laid out WWE or AEW sports entertainment, mishmash hardcore fest, you will see really great Chekhov's guns being introduced and going off. And that is exactly what this match was. Like, if, again, watching it from the beginning, oh, the car, you bring attention to the car, and now the car is back. The doors come out early. It's a door that Frank gets tombstone through. The different parts of the environment, like it's just really, really well laid out, well captured.
It's kind of an odd question, but Steve, did you get did you have to get approval for the car to be driven on the field itself with football season being just around the corner?
No, but I did. So that we did the Gator and the Friday Night Lights, and I
Mhm.
know just what vehicles can and can't go on
Mhm.
the turf just because of being working at the school, right? So like which vehicles do we use on the turf? Do we not use on the turf? So I knew what the track could hold, what the turf could hold, and this little spider slingshot was not an issue. Now, had we ever done another idea we had kicked around, which was a tank, then we were going to have some issues. But luckily, we couldn't find, or unluckily, we couldn't find a tank, so it never became a bridgeway to cross.
Facilities management team is probably very thankful you never found said tank.
Yeah, right.
It was a serious inquiry for a
Oh,
little
we
while there,
looked.
though. Like,
We brought a guy in on a helicopter. You think we didn't look for a tank?
Thank God Marion wasn't around water because maybe a submarine would have showed up at some point.
Oh,
Oh
I never
no.
thought about that.
I remind me offline because I don't want anyone else in the world to hear it. I will tell the two of you, and I'll just tease the listening world that I have another wrestling in water idea I want to float your way. That is just like a pie in the sky crazy dream that who knows, maybe one day we can execute.
Now I'm thinking through my of all the venues we've run, which ones are near water that I may have given Steve this horrible idea for?
No, this idea was all me, my friend.
uh,
It's been in my like Eric and I said. Sometimes it's timing. Some ideas are terrible at one point and they become great later on, or vice versa. There's several things in my mind and in Eric's mind and our collective minds that are
mm.
percolating that haven't yet met their moment.
So here we go. We're headed towards this very viral moment, which we'll talk about in a second of how it literally goes viral. Um, and so we've got two tables laid out. We've transitioned from doors to full blown tables, and the ladder gets set up. And you might be thinking, oh, he's just going to climb the ladder and do like just do a dive off the ladder. He ups the ante.
Think the idea was if he wants to get a 3 count, he should go for 3 points.
Kick through the uprights.
And real quick, while we're watching this, so my perspective on this is different. I'm on the field trying to help contain the crowd
Mhm.
because remember, this is in the middle of a pandemic, and we are trying to be as safe as possible. And not only that, we have hundreds of people spread out over across the entire field. This is all the way on the far end of one side. And I'm going to wait till this moment happens.
He poses, he gets steady.
He
And
hits it perfectly.
There's the field goal that Eric just mentioned and the 3 count.
Straight through the uprights. And I just want to say, kudos to our crowd that night. The impulse in a moment like that is everyone rush right up front, and especially with social media society, it's rush right up front, get my camera right in the face of what's happening. And this crowd, they were very, very comfortable and easy for me to be like, please. I think I remember telling them, like, stay behind the 15 or the 10-yard line, like it was a yard line essentially, because you also, from a production standpoint, you have this really amazing, incredible thing that's happening as far away as we can possibly get from the camera. It's happening as far away as we can possibly get from 80% of the crowd. And we want everyone to be able to enjoy it. We want everyone to see it, whether you're at home, because again, there wasn't a lot of wrestling on TV at the time, especially independent wrestling, where you could see something like this. And so there were a lot of people watching online at home. There were a lot of just kind of moving pieces. And for that moment to be able to be enjoyed by as many people as possible, we really needed that crowd to be willing to fight that impulse of, I'm going to get up front. I'm going to get real close. I'm going to get that shot. And they were all, I mean, the Warrior fans are the best fans in wrestling. They're like, oh, okay, 10, I'll stay here. Okay. It was real great, real easy. And that provided that space for that moment to happen, safely, for that moment to breathe throughout the entire arena. And again, that's that production stuff that day of. I have no idea how the crowd's going to react. I have no idea the in that moment what's going to happen. You just kind of got to be ready for anything. And that was one of that moment, that whole match was one of the most fun from that entire summer.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it felt special, and it felt, look, there's hardcore matches in a lot of places, right? But with the uniqueness of the setting and the venue and the multi-week build and the fact that the pandemic was going on, it was a unique thing at that moment in wrestling. I mean, when you talked about the virality of it a few minutes ago, Dom, like we've all talked about before, right? It got on Sports Center, it got on various shows and podcasts and blogs and whatever, and everybody mislabeled what it was or who it was or what was going
Yes.
on. But at least the moment got out there. But among wrestling fans, like I would argue that the vast majority of people paying attention to wrestling at that moment saw that clip in wrestling world, because everything was shut down and you had very few outlets of live wrestling, and we were one of them.
Yeah, and like you alluded to earlier, so this moment goes completely viral. It ends up on Sports Center. Sports Center thinks it's the halftime entertainment of a high school football game because it is on a high school football field. So it gets viral completely outside of the wrestling world because of that. But like Steve said, there wasn't a whole lot of live wrestling running at this point. So not only was it live wrestling running, you just had Joey Janela jump off of a goalpost of a high school football field and land on top of Frank the Clown and Robert Ego Anthony, who were both laid out on tables. I would argue that would go viral today in a non-COVID world, non-COVID setting, and it went viral. So any closing thoughts? I mean, I know we've covered a lot, but just any other closing thoughts about the match or that first iteration of Stadium Series?
I have one more shout out just to the men who put that match on. We just watched an incredible hardcore match. Tables, goalposts, chairs, doors. I mean, it was an incredible match. And what was extra challenging to the men in that match was we were also presenting Warrior, especially at that time, as a family-friendly environment. Bring your kids to Marian Catholic, sit on this field. You'll be safe. You'll be spread out. You'll be with your family. And it's an environment you can bring kids to. I have 2 children. Steve has a small child. Being able to enjoy wrestling with our family is something that's very important to us. So when you present these guys with this idea of let's have this incredible hardcore, no holds barred, all over the place match, but let's also do it so that little Timmy in the 3rd row doesn't have nightmares tonight. You know, there are elements to hardcore matches where the blood's dripping down the face and it's, oh my God, the thumbtacks in the back. And that's all really cool in the right environment in the right time. The Marion shows that we were running, especially the Stadium Series shows, that was not the right environment for that type of story, or at least that type of action. And these guys were able to put on an incredible hardcore match with all of the things that everybody wanted, culminating with a jump off the goalpost. And at no point did they ever cross that line where, as a parent, I would be like, "Ugh, I paid money for my kid to see this." And so again, just props to the men involved to be able to pull that off in a way that really fit with one of the core beliefs of Warrior Wrestling, which was family friendly wrestling.
Yes. Yes to everything you just said. Well, and it built in such a way where, you know, sometimes you have hardcore matches where 1,000 things are happening. This one built to a spot and a definitive ending that was everything you'd want it to be, whether you were a little kid or an adult. You know, looking around, you're like, oh my, like, I can't tell you how many people said to us at some point in the lead up to this, like, is somebody going to jump off a goalpost? And they did, right? Like, it was exactly what a little kid would hope to see on a football field wrestling show. And it's exactly what a big kid would hope to see on a football field wrestling show.
One more quick shout out, I think, and Eric, you talked a lot about the production and cameras and everything. Shout out to Sorg and his team for capturing that awesome moment in a way that was just so perfect that we're able to come back, what, 3 years later almost now, or 4 years later almost now, and watch it and enjoy it. So shout out to that team as well.
Amen. Yeah, Sorg and Missy. And I don't know who else was on production that I'd have to take a look at my notes, but yeah, they're the best. It's just a great team to work with.
Well, that's going to do it for this one. We've got two more left in this top five series. And I'm really excited for the next two. We're going to talk about, we've mentioned War of Attrition so many times in these first three episodes. We're going to watch a War of Attrition match. We're going to get into the concept, how it was brainstormed, the execution. And then we've got a really fun match with some people we've talked about a couple of times, formally and informally here. So we got that to look forward to. But thank you both for taking time out of your busy schedules to watch a little throwback. And we'll see everybody in the next one.
Thanks. Take care.